From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, the E.T. Presence. Here's what's happening. More than 15,000 people have already been killed and tens of thousands injured after that magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck Turkey and Syria on Monday. At least 3 U.S. citizens were killed in Turkey. Thousands of buildings collapsed, and aid agencies are particularly worried about northwestern Syria, where already more than 4 million people were already relying on humanitarian assistance before the earthquake. Disney said it would cut 7,000 jobs from its global workforce, part of a multi-billion-dollar cost-cutting initiative aimed at streamlining the company's operations in a period of media industry turmoil. Disney had about 220,000 workers as of October 1st, of which approximately 166,000 of them were employed here in the United States. A cut of 7,000 jobs represents about 3% of its global workforce. Mr. Sedlock, the registered investment advisor with us. Well, sign of the times. Other companies are doing the same thing, Mish.
George, the layoffs keep mounting and mounting. Let's do a quick recap here. In November, Meta, Facebook laid off 11,000. In November, Amazon laid off 10,000. In January of this year, Google laid off 12,000. Microsoft laid off 10,000. Salesforce laid off 8,000. Amazon laid off another 8,000, and IBM laid off 3,900.
And Dell just announced 6,500 workers.
It's really incredible. That last jobs report, George, we need to talk about that because the headline number was recreated 894,000 jobs. I'm looking at this headline number. I'm saying, what? And if you open the report, 810,000 of those 894 were a population revision. So the baseline job growth was actually 84,000, not 894,000, like they said. So, it's really strange. I need to get in a message here for the listeners because this is going to potentially affect, millions of taxpayers. And this announcement just came out a couple of days ago from the IRS. They're telling people to hold off filing their returns because 12 states, California and Virginia are two of them, issued these inflation tax refunds. California called theirs a middle class tax fund. And in California, almost 32 million people got these checks. And the IRS is telling people, well, we haven't decided yet whether this is taxable income or not. So anybody who filed and is getting a refund, well, maybe the refund isn't as big as they thought it would be. And this is going on in 12 states. They're telling people, and most probably don't even know about it here yet, George, that they might have to refile. So my word of advice would be, don't spend this all, and wait for the ruling. Now, no doubt the Biden administration is going to pressure the IRS to say, this is just free money, but we'll see. I don't know, and the IRS doesn't either yet, George.
All right, my friend, we'll talk to you next week. Some Fabuloso cleaning products have been recalled over risk of bacteria contamination in them, according to the Consumer Product Safety Commission. As of the recall, no incidents or injuries have been reported. The Colgate-Palmolive Company, the manufacturer of the popular brand, recalled about 4.9 million bottles in the U.S., 56,000 in Canada. Fabuloso says about 3.9 million of those bottles were never released for sale. A Texas man accused of targeting Latinos during a 2019 massacre of 23 people at an El Paso Walmart store has pleaded guilty to federal hate crimes. Patrick Crucius changed his plea to guilty during a hearing in the U.S. District Court in Texas after federal prosecutors said they would not seek the death penalty if he pled guilty. California voters could decide whether to reinstate voting rights to people in prison on felony convictions under a newly proposed constitutional amendment. It would be a major expansion of suffrage for incarcerated people if passed. California would join Maine and Vermont, as well as the District of Columbia, as the only states where felons never lose their right to vote, even while they were still in prison. Let's check in with Howard Bloom, author of The Genius of the Beast. Howard, what do you think of this one?
Well, Monday, a constitutional amendment was introduced in the California legislature by Assembly member Isaac Bryan, and Bryan's amendment, as you said, would give voting rights to people in prison on felony convictions. 2 days later, David Cruz, an ex-felon who spent 13 years in state prison and then helped organize a nonprofit called Initiate Justice, held a press conference to support the prison vote amendment. Cruz said, despite what many people assume, people in prison care about the same political issues that we outside do. So the question is the issue of the right of prisoners to vote important, or is it just trivial? First off, the amendment is not a shoo-in. To become law, it'll have to get a two-thirds vote in both California's Senate and California's Assembly, and that'll be rough. But if passed, will the amendment automatically do what the Initiate Justice program wants? Will it, quote, advance progressive policies in California? The progressives point out that blacks are only 6% of California's population, but they are a full 20% of California's prisoners. And if any of these people were falsely accused, the way that Tyree Nichols was a month ago, some of these prisoners may be jailed for simply being black, so the argument goes, this is a voter suppression issue. Explains the leader of America's progressive movement, Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, if we were serious about calling ourselves a democracy, we must firmly establish that the right to vote is an inalienable and universal principle that applies to all American citizens 18 years and older, period, whether you're in jail or not. Now, as you'd expect, Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, disagrees. He says, quote, voting is a privilege properly exercised at the voting booth, not from a prison cell. We are talking about rapists, murderers, robbers, and even terrorists or spies. Do we want to see convicted terrorists who seek to destroy this country voting in elections? Do we want to see jailhouse blocks banding together to house sheriffs and government officials who are tough on crime? And what both Sanders and McConnell ignore is that there are groups in prison far better organized than the Republican or Democratic parties, and that those groups could easily dictate who a prisoner votes for. First, the black prison population has been subject since 1950 to recruitment by the Nation of Islam, a virulently anti-Semitic organization whose head calls Jews termites and Satanists. Today, 18% of America's 2 million prisoners are black Muslims. That's roughly 360,000 prisoners nationwide, a big hunk of potential votes. Then there are prison gangs. The Latin population of prisons is controlled by the Mexican mafia, who maintain obedience by killing those who stray from their orders. And the white population is ruled by groups like the anti-Semitic Aryan Brotherhood and the Nazi lowriders, who enforce their power with torture and murder. What's worse, these groups also control networks of gangs outside the prison system. Their revenue stream comes from the sale of drugs inside and outside of prisons. If given the chance, do you think the Nation of Islam, the Mexican Mafia, and the Aryan Brotherhood would tell prisoners who to vote for? I suspect they would. I agree that to maintain a democracy, the right to vote should be absolute, and that the forms of voter suppression first invented 148 years ago to suppress the votes of newly liberated slaves should be abolished. But in this debate, it's important to take into account the mechanisms of severe voter enforcement that may be possible far beyond the bounds of progressives and conservatives in our prisons.
And do you believe, Howard, that if you commit a felony, you give up your right to vote?
Well, that's a really tough one. And I'm a Democrat, so I'm supposed to believe that you don't give up your right to vote. But I'm still undecided about that one.
That's a tough one indeed. Howard, thanks so much. Up next, have you noticed how the price of food has been skyrocketing? I'll be talking with a farmer about that. His book is called Everything I Wanted to Do is Illegal, War Stories from the Local Food Front. Joel Salatin joins us next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Joel Salatin with us. His family owns Polyface in Virginia, Shenandoah Valley. It's a farm producing and directing, marketing salad bar beef, pigerator pork, pasteurized poultry, and pastured eggs. He's author of 15-plus books. He speaks at food, farming, and health conferences all around the planet. Polyface Farm is a good farm that featuring in the award-winning documentary Food, Inc., and features prominently as the ecological alternative in the New York Times bestseller Omnivore's Dilemma. Welcome, Joel Salatin, to the program. First time for you, Joel. Welcome to the show.
Yes, sir, George. Thank you. It's a privilege and an honor to be with you.
And you are right. The prices are skyrocketing. What is going on?
Well, there's everything from the war in Ukraine, messing up with fertilizer prices. But I think one of the biggest changes that's happened. Of course, we've got the regular inflation with crazy things going on with printing money out of thin air and things like that. But beyond that, what really facilitated this, I think, initially, was simply that the very, very large processors that are supposed to be so efficient actually came out being fragile, during COVID lockdowns and all that. And because these are aircraft carriers, these are mega 5,000 employee outfits, and when you've got that many people crammed in a dark, damp, cool place, it's not a very healthy work environment, and so this the centralization of the food system actually exacerbated the problems of keeping people at work, quarantining, all those kinds of things. It drove human resources. It drove HR departments nuts. Still is, and these big companies are having to vote an inordinate amount of time and energy to HR requirements and things like that. And so I think the long and short of it is that the question I ask people is, do you think we would have had as big a hiccup if instead of the nation being supplied by 300 centralized mega processing plants, if we'd have been supplied by 300,000, maybe 50-person community-based processing and canneries and things like that plants, would we have had as big a hiccup? And, of course, the answer is no.
Exactly. How many acres do you farm in Virginia, Joel?
Well, we own 950, and then we rent another 1,500.
That's a lot. That is.
Yeah, a lot of it's woodland. Some of it is, but this is not a backyard operation. And the beautiful thing for us was, when fertilizer prices jumped 400%, when Russian fertilizer was cut off, it didn't affect us at all because we don't buy any chemical fertilizer, and so here we are as a smaller outfit. I call us a speedboat in an aircraft carrier food world, and when there are disturbances, and you're on the shoals and you're trying to navigate rocks, you don't want to be in an aircraft carrier. You want to be in a speedboat that can and turn and adapt and move around better.
Absolutely. How did you start farming?
Well, our family started here. I was just 4 when Mom and Dad bought this place, run-down, rock-pile, gullied armpit of the community in 1961, and they never made a living from the farm. Dad always wanted to, but never did. But we went to experimenting. Dad was an accountant. Mom was a school teacher. That paid for the land. And I got my first chickens when I was 10 years old, and started my love affair with farming. I never wanted to leave. And then the question was, well, how do I make a living here? Dad worked in town, Mom worked away, and I had this blank slate of land here. Can we make a living on it? And that's what we did.
Good for you. And you wrote this book, Everything I Wanted to Do is Illegal. Tell me about the title.
Yeah, well, the first big wake up. So we're now going back to the early 70s. I was 10 in 1967, so I got these chickens, and it grows, and Dad, being an accountant, realized that as a small farm, we couldn't compete at the commodity level because the margins are so small. You have to be a great big operation if you're only gonna if your margin is real tiny. You got to have a whole lot of widgets, bushels of corn, or pounds of beef, or whatever to compete at the commodity level. So we needed to wear all the middleman hats. The processor, the distributor, the marketer, and if we could wear those middleman hats and direct market, so we create a branded product and sell it direct to neighbors and friends and people in the area, then then we would get off of that scale treadmill that the low margin people are on all the time. And our town, our city, Stanton, had a leftover Depression-era curb market. So this is before farmers markets. This was a Depression-era curb market the farmers could go to, and there was a memorandum of understanding with the food police, the inspection people, and the marketing people that if you were involved with the extension service, so you were getting government bulletins and you were attending meetings of the 4-H or women's homemakers clubs, things like that, that you could sell at that market without inspection. And so I grew up through my teen years. Every Saturday morning of the year, it was an indoor market. Getting up at 4 o'clock, going down there, a market opened at 6 o'clock, and selling eggs. And we milked a couple Guernsey cows. We sold butter, buttermilk, cottage cheese, yogurt. We would butcher a beef in the meadow. We could cut it up. I could cook my chickens and sell them, and I grew up doing this without any inspection whatsoever, and it took off. People loved this, and we were 15 years ahead of the organic foods movement. And so I'm getting ready to come back to the farm. I'm in high school. I'm thinking, how can I get back to the farm full time? Well, I can just milk a couple cows and sell the milk to neighbors at regular supermarket prices, not jacked up because it's organic or anything. And I'm in business, and I can do that. And so I get out of college, I come home, I'm going to start, and guess what? All that is illegal.
Wow.
And it's never gotten out of my system that what seems to be, what should be a simple thing, transacting food business among neighbors, has become a very marginalized thing. So then over the years, as we started processing chickens in the backyard. Then the government came and told us, we were criminals, they had to close us down. And so we've had all these fights over the years trying to maintain access, to the market without million dollar infrastructure requirements that these regulations require. People don't realize that the food regulations are scale prejudicial. If you're big, they're easy. If you're small, they're very difficult because they don't recognize scale, and that's the problem. So when we have supply chain issues, food issues, food quality issues, recalls, all those kinds of things, what that means is that the regulatory process is prohibiting the kind of innovative, creative competition that would be able to come to the marketplace from community-based entrepreneurs.
Joe, we really never have had serious food shortages that I can recall in my lifetime, except when events occur like bad weather or COVID, then the shelves go crazy. What happens there? Well,
I think, you're exactly right. We haven't had these kinds of things. Bare shelves are a fairly new thing. Of course, again, COVID was certainly a black swan, and again, that was a glitch in which there were, all the institutional food chain was going that direction. The residential food chain was going this direction. Suddenly, when all the restaurants shut down, there was not enough capacity to make those kind of switches in order to deal with the with the increase in the residential food chain. So, that was certainly an anomaly. But I think beyond that, now we're into this high pathogenic avian influenza situation, which hit us in 2015,
Yep.
Hit us earlier than that as well. It's a kind of cyclical, rolling thing, and that's creating havoc as well. it generally does not affect smaller flocks or even pastured flocks like ours.
Hold on for a second, Joel. We're at a break. We'll come back and pick it up and talk more about the food sources here and why the prices keep going up, and when do they start coming back down. We'll take your calls next hour with Joel Salatin as we talk about food prices and jump aboard and share some stories with us. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. With Joel Salatin is with us. His website is polyfacefarms.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. We'll take calls with Joel next hour. Joel, we're talking about the empty shelves and the price of food and all this. What about fertilizer? You talk about how fertilizer prices have skyrocketed. What happened?
Well, what happened was Russia supplies most of the raw ingredients for chemical fertilizer, potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, and when we embargoed them because they invaded Ukraine, then that cut off all of that supply to farmers. And so, what we have here is a series of black swan events: COVID, invading Ukraine, those kinds of things. So that a farm that's dependent on, outside, the more you're dependent on outside places, the more fragile. We've been working with just-in-time inventorying for a long time, and now we're working with just-in-case. And so efficiency has now given way to resilience. Centralization is giving way to decentralization, and to combat these things, we need competition to take over cronyism within the food system. And so, all of those things are confluing to create a problem.
It could be a nightmare when it all adds up, can it?
Well, yeah, it certainly can be a nightmare. And we never know where the tipping point is. People like me have argued against the concentrated animal feeding operation, monocrops, corn, soybean, non-diversified ecological systems. Nature doesn't like single species. It likes diversity. Nature likes complexity, not simplicity. Nature likes a lot of relational stuff, not singular. And so when you stress the system like this, when you, I could just say, abuse it this directly, there are going to be consequences. I mean, if we had a diabolical committee, let's say, we're the bad guy in a 007 movie,
right,
and we have this idea. Let's create a pathogen, toxin-friendly food system. Well, we'd have a single species. We would cram them in real close. There wouldn't be any rest. There'd be no sunlight. Animals would be breathing fecal particulate all the time. There'd be no exercise, and we'd have social stress because herd and flock and confinement is so huge. What I've just described is modern American agriculture, and so nature bats last. And when you start to assault it as directly as we have as a culture, you have problems.
What about GMO foods?
Yeah, so GMOs, we don't use any GMOs here.
Good.
Every day there's more and more information coming out on the deleterious effects of genetically modified organisms. You got to realize that there are reasons why nature has boundaries. And of course, I love innovation, but when you start overriding nature's boundaries, there are all sorts of things that preclude, a pig containing, wheat GNAs or a salmon containing, pig DNA. Those are barriers that, whether you believe, in creation or whether you believe in evolution or whatever, those are barriers that the natural template has erected to maintain, genetic vibrancy. And I'm not talking about, adaptation like, Eskimos can take it colder than, than people in Brazil, okay? I'm talking about adaptation. I'm talking about adaptation to your environment. And so when we override those barriers, there are definitely consequences. And we're seeing those in all sorts of conditions. GMOs are now indicated in all sorts of problems, including the fact that GMOs allowed an incredible increase in the use of glyphosate, which is, of course, Monsanto's Roundup, and the spin-off ramifications of GMO crops in what can be used on them inordinately that wouldn't normally be used. That's another element of the problem.
Did Bayer, when they bought Monsanto, make a bad purchase?
I suppose that'll be debated by business analysts for a long time. I will tell you this, that we've never seen a product that has a $7 billion payout for product lawsuits. We've never seen a product with that big a payout war chest continue to sell the product on the market. George, if you think back in our lifetime, we think of these huge things like the Johnson & Johnson talcum powder, things like that.
Sure.
When stuff gets pulled massively from or has this level of complaints on it,
you pull the product.
Yeah, they pull the product. This one is the first one that I remember in my lifetime that has global problems, and they just continue to manufacture it right along. It's okay. We've got $7 billion payout. We pay it out. We just keep going. I've never seen anything like it.
What happens to food production, Joel, if we just don't fertilize, if we don't chemicalize, we just stop all that?
Well, of course, the naysayers will say, well, look at Sri Lanka. What happened there? Sri Lanka, they starved and all that. Well, it's because chemical fertilizer is a lot like a drug addiction, which is one of the reasons my dad didn't go for it. We do large-scale composting here. We have all sorts of on-site, basically a carbon economy. Nature runs on carbon; it doesn't run on chemicals, and so it's all about the decomposition. And it's a lot like digestion. Think of a compost pile as an exterior digestion process for the soil, and so what happens is if you artificially fertilize, then it's like a drug addiction, and you can't just go off immediately. You have to come off gently, and so the bottom line is, can we produce all the food without these chemicals? Absolutely, we sure can. The fact is that we have created a mechanical, chemical approach to food when it's fundamentally biological. But the biological approach didn't get a shot in the arm from World War II and stockpiles of potassium, nitrogen, and all this that was left over after World War II. And it took a while for the front-end loaders, plastic pipe, chippers, chainsaws, things that made efficient carbon handling efficient on the farm. It took, the 50s and 60s to develop that. Meanwhile, the chemical approach was gaining a foothold, gaining the orthodoxy. And the truth is that if we had a Manhattan Project for compost, not only would we have fed the world, we would have done it without three-legged frogs, infertile salamanders, and a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico.
Joel, I hear that China owns a lot of our farmland. Is that true?
They do, but these things are sometimes people don't realize how big things are. I mean, China owns 400,000 acres or something like that. That is such a tiny amount of land. I think what's got people more concerned about China's ownership of the land is that they have strategically purchased it near U.S. military installations,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
ICBM missile silos and stuff. So 400,000 acres is not that. I mean, there are ranches that size, single owned ranches that size. But it's the strategic location of those acreage, I think, that's got people's eyebrows raised.
Bill Gates is into farmland a lot too, isn't he?
Yes, he certainly is. He certainly is. When Ted Turner was the largest owner back, 30 years ago, he was buying ranches. He was into bison. Bring back the American prairie and the bison.
Right.
Bill Gates is not buying ranch land. He's buying farmland because he's all into crops. So what he envisions is a livestockless future, a cowless future, in which we're going to grow all the protein in laboratories. And it's going to need feedstock. It's going to need soybeans and corn. And so Bill Gates wants to go to monocropping with chemical fertilization on everything, and eliminate the animals, eliminate the cyclical manure animal blessing that the way nature has worked, and go to a strictly chemical monoculture. No pollinators, no birds. It's the Rachel Carson Silent Spring deal on steroids, and that's his plan. And,
will that work?
That when we move to the more we move to a laboratory-based, a techno-sophisticated food system, the less democratization we have in the food system. As long as the rain comes and the sun shines, a cow can eat grass and you can have nutrition. But if your nutrition has to come out of a $1 billion Bill Gates owned laboratory, you don't have food freedom. You are now completely dependent on something else.
Absolutely. Joel Salatin with us. We're going to take calls with Joel next hour here on Coast to Coast. Share some of your food stories with us. The price of eggs goes up, goes down, back up. Where is it right now?
Right now, it's pretty high. I think it's going to take a while for all of this avian influenza material, and grain prices are very high. Grain prices are extremely high. They're 3 times higher than they were just 3 years ago.
Jeez.
So of course, chickens are omnivores and they eat grain. They can't just eat grass. And so when grain prices go up, then egg prices go up. But I think what's really pushing egg prices is this high path avian influenza that's running through these CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, that are inherently very unsanitary and unclean.
It's amazing times, Joel, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is. When Joel Arthur Barker wrote the book Paradigms back in the 70s, brought that word to the world, one of his axioms was that all paradigms eventually exceed their point of efficiency. And those of us who've been in the more biological part, the ecological part of the food movement, have been, saying all along, when's the tipping point? So we put 10,000 birds in a house. And then we put 20,000, and then 50,000, then 100. Where's the tipping point where that paradigm finally tips? And it appears to me that as rapid as these cycles are, and as ubiquitous now within the industry, that maybe we're starting to approach that tipping point.
If you could solve one dilemma as it has to do with farming, what would that be?
If I could do one thing for farming, it would be to create a food emancipation proclamation to allow every citizen the right to the food of their choice from the source of their choice. Right now, we have numerous judges' rulings that Americans don't have freedom of food choice. Now, you say you go into Walmart, Costco, and in Kroger's, and you say, what do you mean we don't have? We've got all this choice. But that choice is a very, very narrowly defined choice through a government licensing permitting system that precludes a lot of things that you would be able to have otherwise. If you want Aunt Matilda's quiche instead of a name brand at Kroger's, you can't buy Aunt Matilda's quiche unless she gets a bunch of government permits and that sort of thing. We talk about food deserts in the urban areas. There are all sorts of holes in the food system, from choice to supply, and a food emancipation proclamation, so that if you wanted to come to my farm, look around, smell around, ask around, and as two consenting adults engaged in voluntary transaction, we can engage in a food trade. That would be great. Right? This is not about food safety. I can butcher a chicken in the backyard. I can milk a cow. I can give it away. But as soon as money changes hands, now I'm a criminal. And so if we would allow direct producer-consumer interaction in the food system, we would have thousands and thousands of small-scale entrepreneur, community-based entrepreneurs coming to the system to democratize the system and create competition with innovation and creativity in the marketplace.
What's going on with food companies like Tyson?
Food companies like Tyson, well, they're
Are they still rolling along here?
Well, Wall Street Journal had a big article. I haven't read it yet. I think it came in yesterday's Wall Street Journal that their profit is down 78%. And of course, again, they're citing supply chain issues, increased grain price, all these input costs. And so, look, what you want is a food system that is as weaned as possible from dependency on off-farm inputs. And so our farm runs on carbon. We don't buy fertilizer. We have a great big chipper, and so we chip junk trees. If all the biomass that we spend $5 billion a year fighting fires, if that biomass were simply converted to compost for farms, so that we took all the money we currently spend on chemical fertilizers and put it into biomass carbon production, we could grow all the food we want. We could eliminate the fires. We could employ thousands of people in direct ecological massage and caress and honor the thousands of people who actually want to work outside and get splinters and calluses on their hands, interacting with our ecological womb, and we would grow earthworms. We would have more nutrient-dense food, and the whole thing would change. So. There are absolute opportunities out here, and we just need to look to nature for the template.
Joel, we're going to come right back and spend an hour of taking phone calls with you next on Coast to Coast. Would you like to react to what you've been hearing? Jump aboard and make a call, and we'll be back with your calls in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Joel Salatin with us. Joel, how long does this continue before things really get out of control?
Well, that's the $64 million question. Yep. People like me thought it would start to collapse sooner than it has. It may be a long time. It may not be. Who knows? But for sure, to whatever, make your food source more secure. For sure, you need to start patronizing sources that don't depend on Ukrainian wheat, that don't depend on Russian fertilizer, that actually honor the pigness of the pig, the chickeness of the chicken, the tomatoness of the tomato, and have a shorter chain of custody, to your table, as local as possible, and farmers who aren't as dependent on these other things. I mean, no man is an island. Nobody's completely on their own. But what you can do is you can certainly minimize those dependencies.
I didn't realize how dependent we were on Russia's fertilizer.
Yeah, I don't think most people did. In fact, I'm in the business, and I was a little bit surprised. But I don't buy it, so it wasn't a big deal to me. But yes, I think all of us were a little bit taken aback, and I think if you knew the kinds of fragilities, the kind of fragility that is within the system, it would actually take you aback. I mean, it presents big buildings and big machines and big numbers and all that, but in the end, it all skips along pretty pretty closely on pathogenicity, toxicity, immune function, because life is not just mechanics, and food is life. Biology is life, and our country views life as fundamentally mechanical rather than biological. And I mean, just take the soil for example. There are 7 billion beings in a handful of healthy soil, and we only have names for 10% of them. 90% of them we don't have names for them. We don't even know what they do, and yet we run into that with a bunch of chemical fertilizer, stick a chemical IV into the soil, and say we don't need soil. All we need is just a chemical IV, and voila, we grow corn. And there, what was the old margarine? It's not nice to fool Mother Nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we've been fooling nature for a long time with our mechanical, chemical, industrial food system complex, and who knows how long we can keep on. I mean, the people who oppose me say, "Oh, we're clever. Humans are clever. We'll always be able to stay a step ahead of whatever." I was in Australia a couple of years ago getting my luggage out of the rack, and I have a cow ear tag on my luggage so I can identify it. 2 ladies were standing there. They saw the ear tag and said, "Oh, are you a farmer?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What are you here for?" They said they're on their way to Perth with an international consortium to deal with superweeds that have been created by herbicides like glyphosate. So that's creating superweeds. And these are weeds that are way bigger and worse than anything that we've ever seen. And so I'm thinking, how long do superbugs, MRSA, C. diff in the hospital from subtherapeutic antibiotic use? How long the superweeds? How long do we go this path and assume that our human cleverness is always going to come up with a better concoction and a better way to handle nature's pushback and adaptation to our disrespect?
Let's go to the phones for you. They are lining up. We'll start with east of the Rockies. Robert's with us, truck driving in West Virginia. Hey, Robert, you're on with Joel. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I have seen some things on the internet about undertakers having problems pushing embalming fluid through arteries. And today I was loading up in New York, loading a load of apples, and got to talking with the gentleman, and I asked him, what did he think about it? And he said he knows 2 undertakers that are brothers. He said he called both of them at home, and both of them told him the exact same thing, that they are having problems with that. And pieces of looking like worm-like things are coming out and getting stopped up into the embalming fluid, and just wondered if he knew anything about that.
That's a new one on me, but I'll tell you, there's more mystery. There's more mystery in biology, more mystery in life than there is empirical information right now. So it doesn't surprise me. What an amazing story, and it's new to me. I don't know about it.
I haven't heard about that one either. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate your call. Brendan's with us, Austin, Texas. Take it away. Hi, Brendan. Go ahead.
Thanks, George and Joel. It's a great show tonight, and I know I've talked about this before, but it's another topic. Almost everything we talk about comes down to it nearly, but we got to end Citizens United and get money out of politics. We got farmers like this who are up against an army of corporations who will lobby to subsidize to keep the toxic food cheap and the healthy food expensive. So there's a documentary in 2008 called Food Inc. that really did a great job of showing that. So, Joel, tonight, my question is seems like something that would be obvious for us to move forward is that we should be selectively breeding foods that require less and less water. For the past 100 years, we've been focusing on selectively breeding foods that have more sugar and less nutrition. So since 1950s, we've lost 80% of the nutrition of the food that we eat. For example, an orange had 21 times more vitamin A in 1950s. Onions and potatoes no longer contain any vitamin A. Broccoli had 4 times as much calcium. And for an apple, it would take 100 apples to get 1 apple of vitamin C in 1950s, which is insane. So I think that we should be selectively breeding for more nutrition and less water. Seems so obvious.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely, the same thing is happening with livestock, with eggs. The same thing is happening, and there's an outfit called the Bionutrient Food Association, and they're trying to measure the mineral vitamin content through a spectrophotometer. That's the thing that Abby on NCIS has, where you put a piece of paint in it and it gives you all the inputs of the paint, and they're trying to make a handheld model where you could actually go and wand food at the supermarket, wand food at the farmer's market, whatever, and you could actually get a measure, and they are finding the same thing. Like, they've already wanded things like carrots and found that you would have to eat like 100 carrots of the worst quality carrot to get the same nutrition as 1 carrot of the best quality. There is a huge variety based on overall soil fertility. The entire industrial food system thrives on non-differential, on homogeneity of food system, and of course, in nature, it thrives on variance. And, a nuance of place, terroir, the whole idea of place. And we don't recognize that in our, very industrial food system. So, yes, the food nutrition quality has gone way, way down. We've had our eggs checked, for example. Our eggs average 25 times more folic acid, for example, per egg than the store-bought egg that's raised in an industrial factory. So the nutrition thing is real, and we've been selecting for sugar. We've been selecting for shelf stability and transportability. And when you select, for example, vegetables to be able to withstand bouncing around on the back of a truck for 1,000 miles, you're going to get cardboard. You're not going to get nutrition.
Joel, you can go about 3 days without water, then you're finished. What about food?
Yeah, well, food, I mean, I guess it depends on how much you're carrying on you, but you can go a while without food. I think the important thing is to realize that the average urban sector, the average city, only has 3 days worth of food supply in it. I'll make my pitch here for the domestic culinary arts and for getting back in your kitchen. People will say, well, what's my first line of defense here? And I suggest your first line of defense is to stockpile stuff at home. Re-up the pantry, the larder. Your larder, we don't even use the word anymore. But, 100 years ago, if you went to town and said, where's all the food would have been in personal larders, where they had their canned goods and they had their dried goods and some, cured pork and things like that hanging in the larder. And today, we go to the supermarket 3 times a week because we don't stock anything at home. And so the first line of defense is to create a stockpile of really authentic, nutrient-dense food in the home, so you don't panic if the shelves are empty. When, like in the early COVID days and things like that, you can go for a while, get a freezer, do some canning, and get real food, not Hot Pockets, not DiGiorno's frozen pizza. Get real food and use your kitchen and enjoy it.
Let's go to Jim, New River, Arizona, west of the Rockies. Jim, go ahead, sir.
Thank you for letting me in on this.
Sure.
My big concern is for 2 years, we put water out every year for bees, and we had no bees for 2 years now. And we saw maybe 10 bees in the whole year last.
Wow.
And they were disorientated. And all the apricot and apple all those trees had no bearing on, no fruit at all. And I just wondered, also noticed that on the windshields where you clean your windshield from insects, didn't do it one time last year. And I just wonder if you had any ideas about that.
Any take on that, Joel?
Yes. Yeah. The important thing to realize is that when we spread toxicity, pesticides and things, they're pretty across the board. And so bees are like the insecticide pesticide canary in the mine, and as pollinators go, so go everything else. And so one of the things you find in some of these very, very intensive monocropped outfits like Bill Gates is encouraging is that you don't have pollinators, you don't have the insect life, the grasshoppers, all that, because it's just a sterile thing. Nature is not sterile. Nature is buzzing with things, and when you come through and blanket spread these toxic materials, and you don't have hiding places because there's not ecological diversity, there's not marshes and grasslands and the whole diversified ecological umbilical, then you don't have places for all of these bugs and insects and pollinators to be able to build nests and have safe places and all that. So it's a management and a toxicity issue that's affecting this.
Next up, we've got Kim in Western Iowa, first-time caller. Kim, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Joel, how in the world are you?
Good. Thank you.
This is Kim Alexander. George, Scripture says to give honor to whom honor is due, and I grew up on a corn, beans, and bankruptcy farm in Western Iowa. Moved to Texas. Met Joel at an eco fair in Austin, Texas, almost 30 years ago, and began to put into practice, bought his books, read them, put it into practice, and my family and I changed the way poultry is raised now in Central Texas, made a good living at it, and moved back to Western Iowa. I'm back in Western Iowa, deep behind enemy lines of the corn and bean monoculture, and doing the same thing again. So I just want to honor him and his zeal for doing what's right when it comes to farming. So that's my first thing. And Joel, I would just add one thing when you're talking about this type of farming, honoring the pigness of the pigs and the chickenness of the chickens. I would just add to it, it also honors the humanity of the humans that do this type of farming.
Yes, you're exactly right, Kim. It's great to hear your voice. Thank you. Yes, how we respect and honor the least of these, i.e., the pigness of the pig, creates an ethical, moral framework on which we hang the honoring and respecting the greatest of these, which is the merriness of Mary, or the Kimness of Kim, the Georgeness of George. Okay, if we're going to honor that as a society, it starts with the least of these and honoring these other beings. Right now, in American agriculture, we don't ask how to make happy pigs. We only ask how to grow them faster, fatter, bigger, cheaper. And when we simply view life as inanimate piles of protoplasmic structure to be manipulated, however cleverly hubris can imagine to manipulate it, we will build a society that starts viewing its citizens in the same manipulative, dominant, disrespectful way. And so, yes, there are ramifications of this way beyond just what's on your plate. It's also how you relate to people and how you maintain a civil society.
What is pigerator for pork?
Pigerator pork, so we use pigs to turn our compost and so to aerate it. You're familiar, I'm sure, with like big windrow compost piles, and they run these big, $50,000 turning machines down through them to turn them. Well, we use pigs instead, so we use animals, so no petroleum, and we don't have to have machinery, and we don't have to drive them anywhere. So the pigs do all this wonderful work, honors the pigs. The pigs are in hog heaven. It fully honors the plow on the end of the pig's nose. So the pig then is not just pork chops and bacon. The pig becomes a co-laborer in this great land healing ministry. And so there are huge ramifications. That's why we call them pigorators. Fascinating work.
Joel, your website, tell us about the Polyface Farms website.
Yeah, so our website is polyfacefarms.com, and it's a pretty comprehensive website. It has, everything from you can buy food from us. If you don't know where to go or where to get it, you can get it. We ship nationwide, so a shout out to all you wonderful truckers out there keeping the nation rolling. So we do ship, but our primary here is in the region where we are. But I speak all over the world, and it has my travel speaking schedule. If you want to come and hear me, it has swag, of course. It has gatherings and events. We do a lot of gatherings, wellness, and food-oriented events, even like libertarian economics gatherings here on the farm, and it's just a wonderful place to get together and fellowship and learn. So we have a lot of things going on. We do schedule farm tours and all that, and of course you can see there what we believe, our value system, what we're pledged to, and just keep up with what's going on.
All right, Joel, we're going to come back and take final calls with you in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, a couple joined just to talk about their visitation by the Vedas. Don't miss that program. We're going to come back in a moment with Joel Salatin and take final phone calls as well as we talk about food prices, food shortages, and how it affects all of us on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you along with Joel Salatin. Joel, the farming industry generally skews older ages. Are we going to have enough young people to back up folks like you when you retire?
Well, that's one of the elephants in the room right now in agriculture is that the average farmer is now 60 years old, and in business parlance, that's about 25 years older than what we know is the median age of an economic sector that's vibrant, which is about 35 years old. So we haven't seen 35-year-old average farmers for a long, long time. So the question is, well, what is this? And I would suggest that the main reason is that when young people can't get in, old people can't get out. So both generations are stuck. And, of course, we know actuarials indicate that in the next 15 years, roughly half of all America's agriculture equity is going to change hands, whether that's inherited by kids that want it or don't want it or sold or whatever. And so, yes, we are in a very interesting time. There's never been that much agriculture equity change hands in any civilization in history except through conquest. I'm not suggesting we're getting ready to be conquested. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. But we are in a completely uncharted waters here as a civilization when we have this much agriculture equity getting ready to change hands this rapidly. And so that's why on our farm we've developed mobile infrastructure so that a young person can enter farming on rented land, borrowed land, collaborated land, and build additional enterprises on an existing land base. So you can run, for example, pastured chickens. You can run them under an orchard. You can run them as an adjunct in a hay operation, a dairy, a beef operation, wheat, corn, whatever. And mobile infrastructure means that you don't have to own the land because you can move your farm, a mobile farm. And the biggest impediment to entry is the price of land. So if you don't have to buy the land and you can have a mobile farm. You can place it anywhere. We've got young people farming, on easement land in California, that's been locked up for green space, all the way to collaborating, building a farm, for example, on a restaurant property, and you can grow the food there. So the mobility of a farming enterprise is critical for creating on-ramps for the next generation.
What's an acre of farmland going for these days?
Well, it depends on where you are. I mean, where we are, it's now, I don't know, $7,000-8,000 an acre. If you're down in, if you're more in the kind of Mississippi, Mississippi, within 50 miles of the Mississippi, it'll normally be half that or less. Obviously, when you head out to the arid west and you get into the dry country there, Nevada, Idaho, New Mexico, those kind of places, it'll drop to, goodness, $1,000 an acre, and so there is certainly differences on whether you have water or not.
It sure is. Let's go back to the phones. Let's go to, whose turn is it? Todd in Bellevue, Washington. Welcome to the show. Hey, Todd, go ahead.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now, in 1982, Bruce Dickinson foretold Bill Gates' global cooling program in the song Total Eclipse when he said, "Sunrise is gone, freezing up the fires." Now, I would like to ask you, do you believe in combating Bill Gates' global warming program by eating In-N-Out burgers 3 times a day? And how do you feel about exoskeletons of insects invading the U.S. food supply, which was on newswars.com? Okay, so I'm in favor of any. You mentioned In-N-Out burgers. That's a brand. That's a chain, a brand chain. I'm in favor of any food alternative that is honoring more to our ecological umbilical. I don't know that In-N-Out does that, but there's a dearth of opportunity of alternatives right now in the country. We need alternatives to McDonald's and Burger King and things like that. As far as we're all going to eat grasshoppers and crickets. I just visited a defunct cricket farm down in Tennessee a couple months ago. In fact, 4 of them went out of business. They all went out the same day when the feed company. Again, all of these alternatives, they don't just grow out of thin air.
What are they raising crickets for, by the way, Joel? For fishing?
The reason the crickets went out of business, these crickets were not going into human food. They were growing for zoo animals. Maybe they all went out of business the same day because the feed company mixed some pesticide in the feed inadvertently. Somebody pushed the wrong button and killed all the crickets, and so the farms went out of business. But all of these things require. Where I'm going with this is that they had huge hoppers of feed that like a chicken house, like anything else, requires feed. So the people like Bill Gates and stuff that are going lab fed, fake all this, that they act like this stuff can be grown out of just thin air, but it takes train carloads of feedstocks. You can't grow something out of nothing. And so if we go to fake meat, lab meat, artificial like this, what's the feedstock? Well, the feedstock's going to be corn and soybeans, which is, if you don't have a carbon decomposition system for that, it's a devastating land use policy. Right now, I think every bushel of corn costs us something like 2 bushels of soil on average in general. Now, if you combine it with animals on site, if you rotate it a little bit, there's a whole show to do just on that topic. But generally, what we want is anything that is more honoring to the natural template.
Let's go to Tony, truck driving in Arizona. Welcome to the show, Tony. Go ahead.
Thanks, George. Looking forward to see you in Baton in a couple of weeks.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Tone. Tony's not there. He was, but he's disappeared. How about Walter in Pennsylvania? Walt, go ahead.
Hi, George. George, I agree with a lot of what Joel is saying, but I think it's a bit unrealistic to. We're 8 billion humans on this planet, and it would be nice if we were all born with 40 acres and a mule, George, but I think that's a bit
impractical.
Trying to create the Garden of Eden in our society today. I think it's a bit unrealistic. As far as genetically modified plants and animals, just because something is done by man or manipulated by man doesn't necessarily mean that it's detrimental. I was mentioning to Tom that, through hybridization and this marvelous technique we have in botany and horticulture grafting, it's theoretically possible to graft apples onto, let's say, a poison ivy vine. Poison ivy is a notoriously vigorous vine, and you could probably produce 10 times the amount of apples on these vines and harvest them very cost-effectively with machinery as opposed to growing them on trees where you have to hire people to climb on ladders and pick them that way. So I would just say that we have to be careful not to be overly paranoid about genetically modified organisms and artificial fertilizers and chemicals like Roundup, etc.
Yeah, but they don't seem to be safe, are they, Joel? Roundup is lost in court.
Oh, absolutely, it has. Of course, now they're winning. They're winning some of these jury trials now, which is why it looks like their $7 billion a liability fund is going to last. But to Walter's points, I appreciate the pushback and the call. As far as feeding the humans, listen. As I mentioned earlier, if we had a Manhattan Project for compost, not only would we have fed the world, we would have done it without all of the externalized consequences and side effects of chemical agriculture. So, yes, we can recreate. We can bring back the Garden of Eden, but it's not going to happen with chemicals. It's going to happen with carbon and solar-grown carbon, biomass, just like it has throughout history. And we can feed the world. In fact, this is the only system that can feed the world long-term and sustainably. And as far as manipulation, of course, I mean, even when I go out and move the cows from paddock to paddock, that's human manipulation. I'm not opposed to human manipulation. What I am opposed to is when we go in and we manipulate so far beyond the boundaries that nature has erected for us, and we push through those boundaries like a bunch of swashbuckling pirates into a mystical, majestic, unbelievable system. I mean, we don't even know why an earthworm turns right or left. We don't. There are so many things in this that we don't know, and we wade in there and we graft apples on poison ivy. I'm not sure I want to eat apples on poison ivy. Just because we can, should we? And are those the weak links? They're not the weak links. Our farm produces 5 times the county average, and we do it with carbon and compost and management. I'm not bragging. I'm simply humbly paying homage to an infinitely wonderfully made system that it's our prerogative to say, are we going to work within the system, or are we going to work outside the system as if the system is broken and we've got to fix it? And so that's the difference. And to your point, to be careful not to be paranoid. Listen, I am paranoid about stuff that kills bees and kills earthworms on contact. Yes, I am paranoid about that.
Next up, Terry's truck driving in Virginia, your neck of the woods. Welcome to the show. Hi, Terry. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, George. It's a pleasure to talk to you finally, sir.
Thank you.
And Joel, it's a pleasure to talk to you again, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a real quick story. Back in 2017, I started my truck driving career, and I started doing local pickups and deliveries. And I was thumbing through my bills one morning, my deliveries, and saw Polyface Farms. And I was like, where in the world is this? Well, anyways, I get there, I make the delivery. I believe you came out with the tractor and helped me unload everything. And I went on my way. I had no idea about the place at that time. So fast forward about a year or so, and I'm listening to Kevin Rutherford. And he mentions your farm's name, Polyface Farm. And I'm like, why does that sound so familiar? And I keep listening, and then he says your name. And I'm like, man, I know this name somehow. So I pull up the old Google machine. I'm like, I know that now. I remember I made a delivery to you.
Small world.
That weekend, I made it a point, and once I realized listening to Kevin that, you sold meat and this and that and the other, I was trying to make a difference in a healthier lifestyle. So I made it a point. I said, I'm going out there to see what this place is all about. And I went out there, and I spent hours on your farm, sir. Had no idea that you had a shop there. I bought all kinds of meat. So I made a point to buy a New York strip. And I went home, I saw or froze some of it, and I kept one out. Well, I had some New York strips from Walmart in the black packages. It's supposed to be the best. So I seasoned them both the same. I cooked them both the same. And I told my wife, I was like, here, try these. Tell me which one you like better. And immediately, without even a second guess, she picked out your steak. I just want to say, sir, thank you for everything that you do. Listening to Kevin and reading your books, I understand the mud that you've had to drudge through, and thank you for putting up with the criticism and doing what you do, sir. Your products are second to none.
Well, thank you, Terry. This was completely unsolicited, and you can pick up your commission check when you come next.
I love it. Joel, the clock has got us. Keep in touch with us. We'd like to use you as a source when things go up and down, okay?
Thank you, George, very much.
You take care of yourself. Up next, the Zetas. They're coming by. Zeta Reticuli is a wide binary star system in the southern constellation of Reticulum. From the southern hemisphere, the pair can be seen with the naked eye as a double star in the very dark skies, others with binoculars. In a moment throughout tonight, you're going to meet two people who claim to have interacted with the Zetas, and we'll talk to them on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Norrie with you, Paul Hamden with us, and later on, Syann will join us. They're both lifelong contactees of the Zeta race and have clear conscious recall of their contact, which begins that they work with in these beings that they are. They are both deep trance mediums working with spirit guides to assist others. Paul's earliest memories of being visited by the Zetas are from when he was 18 months old. Syann's earliest memories of contact with the Zetas are from 4 years old, where she was introduced to a small boy of a similar age. She met the same boy on board a craft several years later. This boy ended up being Paul. Both she and Paul have the same shared memory of time on board craft, as well as many other shared and separate experiences on craft being with the Zetas. First of all, here's Paul with us. Paul, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Looking forward to this as well. How far back do you remember this episode when you were 4 years old?
I've got very, very good recall. I remember seeing the Zetas, as a child. I'd often go outside at night, looking at the sky, sort of talking to these beings. Of course, back then, there was no TV that we had. There was no internet. Why, I sort of managed to be talking to these beings that I wasn't even aware that they were extraterrestrials at that age, of course. But obviously as I got older, I realized what was going on.
Can you tell us how this started for you, Paul? What happened?
Yeah, for sure. It was probably about when I was 18, I was in Melbourne in Australia, and I was with a friend, and we were in a block of units, about three stories up. And I was standing at the kitchen window looking out, and a craft appeared. It was about 7 or 8 meters across. And I said to my friend that was helping me do the dishes, can you see that? And he said that he could. And then the side of the craft was only about sort of 8-10 metres away from the window. The side went clear and 2 extraterrestrials appeared through the side of the craft. And some of our friends had come to the house or the unit where we were. We let them in and they came over and they could see the beings as well. So this craft actually sat there for about 5 minutes. And we were able to see these beings quite clearly. We didn't even know, we'd never seen anything like this. Then when I was about 23, I woke up one morning getting ready for work, and it was the lights were off. I got dressed. I walked into the kitchen. As I reached out to turn the light switch on, I heard a rustle in the corner, a noise, and this being lunged at me and grabbed me by the left arm, and I was pretty strong, and I started wrestling with it, and another being jumped onto the other side of me, and then I was sort of worried then, and then the third being jumped on me, and I went down, and that's all I remember. And I woke up thinking that it was a dream, and so I looked down and I realised I had my clothes on, and my shirt was on backwards. When I was about 40 years old, spirits started coming, and I had no idea what was going on. It was just a complete disaster. And I was thinking to myself, could this get any worse? And then as I got much older, about 48, I started to see the extraterrestrials moving around my house. It was as if somehow the fabric or the energy around me started to shift to the point where I was now able to see them. But I couldn't contact them. I couldn't talk to them. I knew that they were coming into the house, but I had no way to be able to sort of evidence that contact. I started to develop also as a medium quite heavily at that time, doing deep trance work. And I had a group of people that would come to the house and sit with me, and they were telling me that they were seeing this extraterrestrial face over the top of mine. And so we put up some sort of small video camera, and we were able to record this face that was turning up. Someone said to them, what they were speaking through me to the people, someone said, look, if you're who you say you are, then, you should be able to bring a craft. You aliens say that you fly around in craft. And I thought that was a great idea. And the extraterrestrial said, yes, we'll bring a craft. And so for about 2 weeks, every time I sat, they would come and they would talk about bringing the craft. And I got to the point where I thought it wasn't going to happen. And I'd organised for a group of people to be there when the craft came because I wanted evidence. I didn't want to have to start taking pictures. I wanted testimony for people to see it. What happened was we had about 20 people with me. We were in a big circle sitting on a property, and the steam rolled in, and all the dogs were howling on the property. It was massive, this property. And the craft landed and the beams came out, and they walked around everybody. And a lot of the people that were there were sort of anaesthetised. There was something going on where they were not able to actually, interact with the beings at all. They were able to sit down and keep their eyes closed, and other people had their eyes open. But then some of them, and myself included, I had my eyes open. The beings actually came and put their hands on their shoulders, so they were walking around us. The ground was really rocky, and so you could hear anybody walking around. There was about 8 or 10 beings walking around behind us. And then after that occurrence of the class coming, Kathleen Martin contacted me and asked the Zetas with Wheeler. And so we asked the Zetas, they said they would, and then 3 days later, they took Kathleen onto a craft and they healed her permanently. That was really good of them to do that.
Paul, about how many contact moments have you had with the Zetas?
Hundreds. Not craft landing, of course, but actual contact with them, many.
Are they doing this with other people on this planet?
I think that they are, but the problem that we've got is how complex the contact is. So a lot of the contact is buried behind screen memory. And because it's buried behind some narrative, like some person will have a dream, they think they're on a craft, they think they're flying the craft, what will happen is that the person will either believe that they're on a craft, flying a craft, or dreaming about a craft, but that wasn't happening at all. They were given a screen narrative by the extraterrestrials. I would suggest there's a large amount of people globally that are being contacted, but they don't know because of the screen memories.
You also channel the Zetas, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. So I do public sittings. Generally 30 or 40 people will come and they'll talk to the Zetas. And that's how a few of the books came about. So a scientist came and spoke to the Zetas, and we wrote a book called A Primer of the Zeta Race. And then the second book, which is about 700 pages, is called The Zeta Interviews, and we give those two books away for free.
Paul's website, of course, is linked up at coasttocoastam.com, and it's called thezetaconnection.com. A couple of his books include The Zeta Race, Inside the Hive Mind, and also a primer of the Zeta Race as well. Would you say that the Zetas are friendly, Paul?
I would suggest that the Zetas themselves are friendly, or they look very much like some grey race, but they're actually not. Although they're part of a species, of the grey species, they are not the actual greys, the ones that are accused of doing all the abduction. So the Zetas themselves have only been positive, have always been honest in their dealings with people, have done the healings, have come when they said that they would. When they said they'd bring a craft, they did. Basically, you can only ever take somebody at their word.
Absolutely. Now, this is it's an amazing thing. Now, tell me about the relationship with Syann, who we will meet shortly.
I was contacted by Syann many years ago, and we started to talk. She was telling me that she had extraterrestrial contact. I didn't remember at all that I'd met her on craft, and we started talking, and a lot of the experience that she had, I realised that I'd had them when I was younger myself. She came across and did a sitting with the Zetas, and she realised that after talking to them, that they knew things about her that I didn't know. And so when they told her that she'd been on craft and what had happened to her on craft, she knew that what she experienced was real as well. Syann and I definitely are people that look for evidence, and any time we work with the Zetas, or we say, that the Zetas have come and healed somebody or whatever, we ask people to write testimonies and, sort of to evidence that process.
Paul, what do the Zetas want with us?
I would suggest that the Zetas are looking to try to support humanity to be the best that they can possibly be. They see that on the timeline that the capacity for humans to have problems in their own development, to move past that massive blockage that we have as a race, and move into a new level of consciousness, but in the physical 3D state, means that we need to have beings with us that can help us to identify what is a better type of consciousness to have, rather than the one that is very three-dimensional based in regards to, conflict and problems, all of these issues that are occurring on the Earth at the moment.
Paul, when we Earthlings see UFOs, spot UFOs, what % of them could be a Zeta craft?
That's a massive question, because a lot of the things that people see, so imagine this, you're looking into the night sky, you're doing C5, and you're generating consciousness, and consciousness reflects back to a group of people or yourself what you want to see. You have a desire to see craft, and so often consciousness will reflect back itself. So to say, well, are these craft from the Zetas? Yes, there are craft. Are these craft a construct of the human mind? They can be as well. So this is why when people see a craft, if you can see the craft by doing a calling in process like CE5, they should be asking the craft to come in closer, much closer, so that ultimately they can have good evidence of contact rather than just seeing flashes of light in the sky.
What do they think of us, Paul?
They think that humans as a race have massive potential to be much better than they are. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the human race. It just means that they understand that in consciousness, our abilities are so high that each of us has the potential to be so much more that they would easily, work with people. They like to spend, giving information, time giving the information. That's why that the information's in the books because, and we give them away for free because we want people to read the books and understand what is the potential of human beings to understand how to live in a relationship with this planet. And that's probably one of the most important things.
Paul, were your parents aware of this episode since you were 18 months old when these were happening? Did they know what was going on?
No. And when I actually did speak to them about it, they've passed over now, but when I had spoken to my parents about it, they knew something was going on, but they were too terrified to talk to me about it. I had to basically face it and go through it myself.
How old were you when you attempted to talk to them about this?
I started talking to them when I was about 40. So they would come into the house, and I would see them as a distortion, not as a full-form physical being. And in doing so, I would talk to them and say, is there anything that you'd like to talk to me about? Because obviously you always challenge your own cognitive state. Am I seeing something? Is this really happening? You should always be challenging what's going on. And that's why when I got to the point where I was able to get them to evidence themselves by giving other people, contact or healing or even being in a craft, that's when I started to really, work towards getting a better line of communication with them. And what they did was they taught me a method for contacting them, and that method's called heterodyning, and it doesn't have anything to do with CE5. And that's a method that they prefer for contact because it has to do with like binaural beats, but using consciousness to do it.
Tell us a little bit more. How would you contact them? In a different state of mind or something? Do you go into like a trance state?
So what happens is every day you breathe. Breathing is the first thing that you do when you're born and the last thing that you do when you pass over. Internally in your breath is harmonics, and those harmonics are very, very subtle. Every time you breathe a level of harmonics. And so if you understand how to use your breath work correctly, you can create a sustained level of energy around yourself. Once you do that, we call that a sphere technique. Once you create that sphere, you can then populate it with your own consciousness and seek out contact with other beings. These heterodyne states are where you start to then interact with other beings. Now, of course, you need to evidence that because you don't know whether it's a spirit person coming to you or not, because spirits also use a similar process to heterodyning, but a lot of that contact with them is mind to mind or mental mediumship. And so I suggest that most people can learn how to do this process, but it's more about spending the time learning about your own energy, learning about how to breathe properly, learning about your harmonics, learning about how to hold your own energy, and also how to breathe correctly, and go into those very clear states of stillness that the extraterrestrials require for contact.
Why do they still cloak and dagger and not make themselves so public to us?
Yeah, that's a good question. The whole cloak and dagger thing is to do with, I'm sure you've heard of Gary Nolan, and he has been tasked to do some work with What are the effects of humans when they come near craft? And what we've found is, myself included, when the Zetas came, I would often in the beginning get burnt down the side of my face. And so we had to work out, well, why is this happening? And it's to do with frequency. And so the whole reason for the cloak and dagger is because if they truly came, either humans would do two things. They'd either be physically harmed by the technology that the Zetas have, or they would probably black out. A person would just go unconscious because their level of consciousness is fairly high. And when you're in their energy, their heterodyne state is so high that you as a human would have problems staying conscious. And so most times you'll notice when they do contact people, people are asleep.
That's true. Stay with us, Paul. We're going to take a quick break. We'll talk to Syann next and then bring you back next hour for phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. So up next is Syann. She, too, is a contactee with the Zetas, and this all happened to her when she was 4 years old. We'll take your calls next hour with those contactees from the Zetas in just a moment. And when we come back in just a second, Syann, another contactee, joins us. We'll talk with her about her situation. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. We've been talking to Paul Hamden, and now we're talking to Syann. They are both lifelong contactees of the Zeta race and have been clearing conscious recall of their contact with the beings that they worked with. They are both deep trance mediums, also working with spirit guides to assist others. Paul, as we mentioned, his earliest was when he was 18 months old. Syann's memory was from 4 years old, and here she is with us. Hello, Syann. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And let me ask you, so you were 4 years old when this all started for you?
Well, that's the earliest memory I have. I mean, who knows what age, the contact actually started. But, that's my earliest memory, around 4 years old, maybe 4.5.
And you met Paul when he was a little boy.
Yeah, twice, actually. It was actually twice. The first occasion, I have sketchy memory, but what I do remember is that we were just observed by the beings, just naturally playing with toys together in the same space. I think it's always a bit crazy when you look back on these events and you wonder, as a small child, why on earth you didn't find that unusual, that, you're suddenly finding yourself in the middle of the night playing with somebody who shouldn't be in your house, surrounded by extraterrestrials. But I think when most contactees, as they get older, they realize that the realization of the gravity of what's taken place is kind of shielded from our minds until we're, mature enough to be able to process it. That was the first time when we were around 4 years old. And the second time, when I was around 8 years old, that was quite a long story, but it involved a screen memory, and it was hidden from me up and only till about, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And they've managed to work a screen memory in of quite a normal event that had a completely false ending. It was almost like a screen memory that was designed to fail. And when I realized that the way this memory had ended was not the truth of the situation, I immediately realized it was a screen memory. It was just alarmingly obvious in the context I was working with them by that point. And the memory dropped, and I remembered the entire experience of being on board with him. The interesting thing about those two experiences was that we were both more or less the same age on board craft, when the reality is there's a bit of an age gap between Paul and I. But they said they only did that twice, and that's all that we can remember.
Paul said he thinks he had about 100 contactees with them. Do you recollect how many times this has happened to you?
Oh, goodness. No. Dozens and dozens of times. I wouldn't suggest it's in the hundreds for me, definitely less than the hundreds. But I'm maybe missing a few years, and Paul's got a few more years on me to collect those memories. But no, I'd suggest that my contact, although it has been fairly significant, it's not been of the same extreme level as I suggest he's had in his lifetime.
Syann, was there a point where you told your parents something very strange is happening to me?
I had conversations about paranormal events. We've addressed spirit contact, and extraterrestrial contact has been talked about, but not in any significant way at this point.
Why do you believe they're contacting people like Paul, like you?
I think, as Paul said, that there are many, many individuals being contacted, far more than we'll ever realize, and have been for a very long time. As to why that's taking place, well, Zetas do tell us that a large proportion of the human population are hybrid human, which means, from their perspective, that the consciousness that forms the human is part spirit, from spirit realm, and partly from an extraterrestrial race. And by a free will agreement with the spirit people, which is absolutely necessary for that to happen, the consciousness of the extraterrestrial combines with the consciousness of the spirit person, and that forms the consciousness of the hybrid human. As to whether or not somebody realizes that that's the case for them, well, that's for somebody to work out as they go along. But I know, having worked with many, many, many contactees and experiences over the years with Paul, that there are so many people out there staring at the sky at night, feeling that they don't belong on this planet, thoughts that can't be evidenced in any way, but they feel so strongly drawn towards. Who knows how many people out there are being contacted.
Is it conceivable that you are part of a hybrid program?
In consciousness, yes. When people talk about hybrids, I think there's a distinction to be made that doesn't always necessarily get made. People talk about biological hybrids, and then they talk about hybrids of consciousness. And the Zetas talk about hybrids of consciousness existing on this planet. They don't ever refer to biological hybrids being on this planet.
Have you ever been aboard a Zeta craft, Syann?
Yes, I have. And I recall it without any need for hypnosis.
Can you describe what it was like for us, what it looks like?
The memories that Paul and I both share of one particular occasion, the interior of the craft, from my perspective, I was within, it was a circular space. It had a domed roof. I was within a curvilinear room that would follow, from my perspective of where I was, it would follow the curve of the space that I was in. The one wall of that, if you like, was see-through. Maybe it was. I don't think it was glass, but it had, you could see through it. It was transparent, and it looked into a circular inner space. That space was very dark, and in the center of that space there was some domed console at the two ends, opposite ends of this space on the diameter, if you like. There were exit entry points, and every now and again, Zeta beings would walk through and up to that dome, and just walk off again. Obviously, checking up on something or other, never interacting with myself or the other humans in this we'll say glass room. These rooms, or container areas, that's what it felt like at the time. They were all around. All around the periphery of this circular space. On one occasion, I was in there with Paul, and a very tall, 7 foot, easily 7 foot tall Zeta came straight up to the glass, and he put his face right up to I'll call it the window, and it's very alarming, and I was probably beyond terrified at that point. Well, Paul was so obviously clearly used to being there. He simply outstretched his hand up to the being on the other side of the glass and put his hand out to me to calm me down. That's one occasion I've seen. I've been at what looks like the front of a craft before, looking out of some sort of observation panel, like what you've described as a window, but without glass. It just looks like you're looking into space. And behind me, again, it's a kind of a horseshoe shaped maybe, and you can see consoles or controls around the outside. And again, the Zetas are just, they pretty much seem to be minding their own business, just doing whatever they need to do, all very passive, very calm.
Has there ever been a point, Syann, that you felt that their, let's say, intentions were dishonorable?
No, never.
Never felt that way?
No, never felt that way.
Oh, that's good, I guess.
Yeah.
What do you think they think of us as people?
We have many people come round to speak to them. As Paul said, weekly we have a home circle, if that's what people call it, the home circle in the mediumship world, where the same people come round every week to support the development of the medium. And the Zetas, when there's somebody new there, they always generally ask them, what is it like to be a human? Tell us, in your experience, what it's like. They're always very interested to hear from people. I don't think we've had one sitting in our own space. It's different to a public sitting where they've not asked the person. I think they're very interested in how we think, why we think the things that we do. I think they're trying to understand us as much as we're trying to understand them. I think in many ways they're probably trying to figure out a contact protocol, just as the way humans are trying to work out the best way to introduce themselves to extraterrestrial races. If you look across the world, every culture, every society, they generally have a different way of saying hello. Some people shake hands, some people bow, some people, kiss cheeks in France, for instance. And they're probably, I think they're very interested in learning about all the different nuances of human culture, just as we are in them.
Aside of Paul, have you seen any other human beings on the craft or with the Zetas?
Yes, I have, yeah. In several different contexts. I've definitely seen other people. We did a series of energy work with a group of people. At the request of the Zetas, they invited people to come for what we call energy restoration. And on one of those occasions, there were several people that were in consciousness taken on board craft during that process, and I was on board with them. I could see exactly what was going on. And when the people came back round, if you like, to normality, they jumped off the bed. I've been on craft, and I was able to say yes, I was there with you, and we've both been able to describe exactly what we saw, what happened. It's been very interesting. The times outside those kind of more public events, on my own, I've definitely seen other people on board craft. Nothing terrible going on. It's just more of an observation process with the Zeta, as far as I've observed, as far as I've experienced.
Tell us about your work as an artist and what contributions the Zetas have made to that.
Yeah, that started about 10 years ago. I'm not, professionally trained artist. It's something I've always just enjoyed doing when I have some spare time, although of late that's increased. But about 10 years ago, I realized that the paintings that I was creating were not coming from me. I found myself working in an altered state. I developed working in altered states of spirit people decades ago. And what I found was that when I was painting, I was finding myself in a similar sort of altered state. When I then first met Paul again in person on this planet, he was able to look at the paintings and tell me exactly what I experienced with the paintings as I created them. He was able to point out all sorts of intricacies about them that I had absolutely no idea about and had no idea I'd even created. And then what we began to find is that people, when they viewed the works, one case in point was at an exhibition. I had a series of 5 paintings that I exhibited there, and people would just stand in front of them and become absolutely mesmerized, to the point they were in an altered state themselves. And we began to realize that they were transferring the energy through me as I was painting or creating the images. And some of these images, they're highly constructed. I wake up, there's an image in my mind, and like a song that just won't leave your head. You know how you get a song on replay. This image would just be at the forefront of my mind, in my mind's eye, until I'd drawn it, painted it, however it came out. And then other times, these paintings, they just flow. They just come out of nowhere. And, people come round to the house, they just stood there and started crying in front of the paintings. And we obviously asked them about it. And yes, that's what they've been doing with them. And it's very lovely to be able to create that.
Are there pictures of some of your work on your website?
Yes, there are. Yeah, we do have a section I've popped in there where people can look at the work if they want to.
Did they ever talk about a propulsion system, Syann?
Not to me, no. I believe they have talked about in their own methods of their craft, construction and technology. That information is in the primer of the Zeta race, if anybody wants to read about that. The scientist helped put that lot together. That's so not my area. I do the art and I leave the science to somebody else.
Have they taken you to the Zeta Reticuli star system?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Now, when you say not that you're aware of, could they have done and you just don't know?
Absolutely. I'd suggest that, yes, there is absolutely the potential for that, but I don't have any recall of that if that has happened. I'd suggest I remember, I don't know, maybe 10% of the contact. We know that there's so much more contact that we don't remember. For whatever reason, they don't let us remember this, but they've allowed us to remember this particular contact. Who knows why they do that? But yeah, no, I don't have any conscious recall of being there.
We're going to come back in just a moment with Paul and Syann and take initial phone calls. Paul first. Their website is called the Zeta Connection.com, and that is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Calls next on Coast to Coast. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. We're going to take your calls with the Zeta Contactees in a minute when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Paul Hamden with us, and Syann with us. We're going to start with calls with Paul, so when you address Tom, make sure they're for Paul as we talk about his Zeta connections. Paul, did the Zetas ever say how many civilizations are out there in the universe?
They did say that they thought, because their numbering system is different to ours, but they said that within this Milky Way galaxy, which is 100,000 light years across, there was about 1,000 civilizations.
That's a lot.
Sure is.
I had asked Syann, she did not have an answer, but did they ever tell you their propulsion system for their craft? How did they do they bend space and time? How do they move?
Yeah, so basically they're using what's called space-time compression to move from one space to the next. So quite often a human will look up and see a craft, and then next thing you know, the craft, zipped across the sky and moved to thousands of kilometres, within a half a second. But that's because they're compressing and uncompressing time as we know it. And so for us, maybe 10 seconds has gone past, but for them, only 1 second.
This is dramatic. Are you glad this has happened to you, Paul?
That's a really good question. I think it's been really challenging because when I speak with a lot of contactees, and we have people contacting us every day, they're trying to make sense of what's going on with them. I understand what they've had to go through to get where they are, and a lot of people are now starting to see what is possible within their own lives in regards to contact. So from my own perspective, because I've got contact with them and they're able to speak through me to other people, even publicly we do this, I'm sort of thinking that there's a lot of benefit to the contact that I've had with them.
How much does our government or do governments know about what's going on?
Oh, I don't have that information. I'm sure that there's plenty of people out there that would have that information that are public.
Have they ever approached you, Paul? Government?
No.
They have not. You would think they would. You're in a basket full of knowledge.
My attitude is that we've given away a lot of information. If anybody wants to read it, they can. And if anybody wants to contact us, they can as well. So we're not worried about the information in any way. There's a lot of books that are out there, maybe, I don't know, I don't even know how many books, maybe 10 books that we've written so far. And that information's out there, and the first 2 books are freely available. So, there's a lot of information in those books.
Let's start with some calls for you east of the Rockies. Brian is with us in Indianapolis. Hi, Brian.
Hey, George. How you guys doing today?
Fine, birthday boy. How are you?
I'm all right, man. Hey, listen, I'm kind of hesitant to kind of ask this, but Paul, I heard you mention earlier that you think that people can make contact with them. So my wife and I, we're stargazers, as the Coast family knows. So how would we go about, and I'm not really sure if I want to do this or not, but I'm sure Chris will be all in for it. How would I go about contacting them, and what would I expect if they contact me? And I might have a follow-up question, George.
Okay, Eric.
All right. So
Brian,
the very most important thing that everyone would need to do is you need to learn about your own energy first in meditation, learning about how do I feel right now? Because when you're going to step forward to make contact, you must understand what the energies are that are coming to you. You can have spirit people coming to you, or you can have astral energies or astral entities. And so you want to make sure that you understand fully your own energy so that when you step into the process of creating contact, that when your energy shifts around you, that you know the difference between your own energy and their energy. They're not going to come to people physically. They're going to come to people in mind-to-mind contact via consciousness, and they're going to do that if they know that you understand the difference between their energy and your own energy. Spirit people do this all the time. Spirit people work with mediums. They evidence themselves quite clearly. Extraterrestrials can do the same.
Any follow-up, Brian? Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. So we don't meditate. We always say we want to. We feel like we're in tune with the universe. So it's a little bit more complicated than just saying, "Hey, we see you up in the sky. Come and talk to us," then, isn't it? Now, and I'll take this answer off the air, George. Y'all have a good day.
All right, Brian. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that because what it's all a bit useless if you've just got something going on around you and you've invited it to you, but you don't know what's going on. And if these beings are using screen memory technology or, energy distortions or fabric recreation or the phenomenon in ways where they're trying to contact you psychologically, then there's an expectation from them that you have spent time getting to understand your own energy. It's not about getting instant contact. It's about building contact slowly so that it's safe and evidential.
Let's go to Jim, British Columbia in Canada. Paul, go ahead. Hi, Jim.
Hi, George. Hi, George. Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for taking my call, you guys. Got a kind of an off-the-wall question here. I don't know if I had contact with the Zetas or not. I've had a contact with an off-worlder guy a couple of times, two different people, and they left a triangle on my finger right in front of my eyes. That was in 2020. But I had them hammer on the window. I had a picture that I took. And this is very, very odd. I had tagged the picture. This was right when we had all the heat here in BC. It was 49 Celsius. I didn't know what this object was up in the sky, but I tagged the picture. I took a bunch of pictures in the same area. And I tagged the picture and wrote UAV next left, not because it was, I didn't know what it was, so I just put it there for my own interest. And when I went to save the picture, I could go reset or save on the picture. When I went to save the picture, I hit save, and what looks exactly like two, I don't know, I guess they're gray alien hands waving at me through the window of my car. It's clear as day. I show people, it convinces them instantly, wow, look at that. I don't know. I didn't do it. Somebody could have played a trick, but they'd have had to go to the future and done it from the future when I was going to tag that picture. And then I had them, what seemed to be something, hammering on my window. If you could believe that, I'm on the 6th floor in the apartment, outside the window, bam, 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 bam. But it wasn't in our reality. It sounded like it was about 2 or 3 feet out from the window, and loud hammering. And my building is completely silent with seniors here. There's no noise whatsoever. But I was kind of like soaking this in, and then I sort of was startled at one point when they did it. This was last July, so I clapped my hands really loud 3 or 4 times to kind of say, you know, I can hear you guys outside the window. And then I heard this head away from the window, as if they were flying away from the window out into the night. You could hear them, bam, 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 and it disappeared as it went. It was very odd, and I thought, well, I don't know. It wasn't disturbing or anything. I thought, well, I don't know if that was them or not, but the picture that I have with those hands through the window, I guarantee you, if you saw it, you'd say, wow, you know. I don't know what that is, but it sure looks like UFO hands through my open window in my car.
Are we being visited, Paul, by other races, UFO races?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'd suggest to that caller that if they want to, they can send me that picture and I'll have a look at it.
Through your website?
Yes, they can send it to Zeta_events@hotmail.com.
Okay, and the website is thezetaconnection.com in case you don't get it, Joe. Lots of strange things out there, that's for sure. Did you have many pictures, or did you have artists sketch what you've seen, Paul?
We called craft in, and we took a picture of it. It's a triangular-shaped craft. It was about 50 metres above the house. It was taken at night. The craft is dematerialised, but the technology of these days of cameras is quite good. We've still got the outline, the shape. We've had a craft come down over the house, and we were told we were allowed to record it via audio, and so it was using a sonic type of sounding process to come down. Anybody could have heard the craft coming down. It was quite loud. It was in broad daylight. So we've got sort of certain types of evidence that's only for us because we like to have that information as well.
Carlos is with us in Miami. Welcome to the show. Hi, Carlos.
Good morning. Good morning, George. Good morning, Paul. I have a question. If you recall Betty and Barney Hill, they also, Betty recalls that, she was walking around the craft and she looked at this recessed area, and there were floating spheres, silver spheres, and she asked the beings what were those, and they told her that was where the part of the universe that they came from, and she says she didn't know where that was because she didn't study astronomy, that there were people on Earth that did study just particularly astronomy. And so they told her, if you don't know what system that's from, you don't know where we're from. Now, eventually they found out that it was Zeta Reticuli. Did the beings, Paul, where you were in, did they tell you or showed you the system like they showed Betty and Barney, or did at all? The second question would be, would they have asked or told you that they also have met Betty and Barney Hill, or that ever came up, or you even asked that question?
In regard to the first question, they told us that themselves. And generally when they first come to us, they were clicking. There was lots of clicking noises. We weren't able to record them speaking, but we didn't know what was being said. That was a problem. In regard to Betty and Barney Hill, when Kathleen Marden spoke to the Zetas through me, they indicated that they knew of Kathleen and her generational line. So they never mentioned Betty or Barney personally, but, there's a lot of other information, of course. It's very difficult to give all the information out right now because we're very limited with time. There's a lot of things going on, especially for the planet at the moment.
Next up, let's go to Shanny in California. Welcome to the show. Hi, Shanny.
Hi, guys. Well, I'm asking a question that I actually asked about a month ago to another speaker that you had, but she didn't know anything about it. But it relates to the Zetas, so maybe you can help me.
Okay.
So I heard on that show, Cosmic Disclosure, there's this guy, Tim, who's like a ambassador to the ETs. He's from Germany. And he's been told that this crazy theory that the tunnel of light that we see when we die is actually an installation that's been planted by the Zetas to sort of keep our souls trapped, to keep returning back to Earth and reincarnating on Earth rather than, jumping around the universe after we leave our bodies and stuff. And I mean, that's a pretty far out theory, but do you know anything about that, or have you heard that?
Yeah, so basically when a person leaves their physical body and they move towards spirit realm, there's a lot of different belief systems that people have, and they carry them with them. The Zetas have said that they do not in any way capture humans. They do not in any way work with human souls. They don't want human souls. They don't need human souls. And the problem is that a lot of people are using that type of information to instill fear into the human race. Because, of course, at our core inner being, we all know that we need to, when we pass over, that we need to travel somewhere. And so to be told that there's the capacity for a person to be trapped also creates a lot of fear. The Zetas have said it's not true.
We've got Michael now in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hello, Michael. Go ahead.
Hello, George. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Sure thing.
I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'd like to ask if there were any other places in Australia, because I've been all over Australia, that this type of thing has, you've experienced it with other people that you know, be it in New South Wales or the center of the country or the western part of the country.
Any other spots in Australia where these connections occur?
There's a lot of places globally where there is a lot of contact. And I would suggest that, of course, the areas with the least amount of EMF, the least amount of interference, is where the craft will come. It is based around who is there at the time. We've been with other people in other groups, and the craft has flashed up quite large. it just depends on where you are and how clear the night sky is, and how much capacity there is for the craft to easily materialize into the three-dimensional space.
Have you ever been scared, Paul, by them?
I was scared. Remember I said that I had 3 of them take me down when I was younger?
Yeah.
I was terrified, but the difference was that they were basically trying to get me onto a craft. When I was much older, they would come in and say, listen, do you want to come onto the craft? And I would just roll back over and go to sleep. And then they'd keep sort of saying, you need to come out, and I would. So it got to the point where I wasn't worried anymore. I would suggest that in the beginning, when I didn't know what I knew now, yes, I was very concerned about it. This is why we spend a lot of time talking with people, because I think people have read a lot of information on the internet that's untrue, and a lot of people have a lot of negative connotations about extraterrestrial contact.
But you think they're safe? They don't have any agenda?
So far, so let's imagine that there are 1,000 civilizations. We only work with one, and that they so far have given evidence. They have definitely, been upfront in the information that they've given. They've come when they said that they would. And so, you really get to the point where you need to take somebody at their word and build a relationship on that. I've said to them, if they ever do anything that I find to be negative or unfriendly towards humans, that I'll terminate contact with them.
Paul, we're going to come back in just a moment and take final calls and wrap things up with you. Paul Hamden with us, of course. Syann is the other person who has been in contact with the Zetas. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. We'll be back to wrap things up with Syann in just a moment here on Coast to Coast as we talk about the Zetas and their involvement with them, to be sure. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with Syann is with us now. And let's go to first-time caller Barry in Florida. Barry, welcome to the program.
George, I'm first-time caller, but I listen to your program quite often.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question for Syann. In her conversations with these aliens, does she ever ask them, do they believe in God?
That's a great question. Syann, has that question of do they believe in another creator ever come up?
It comes up quite frequently, and especially the public settings. Everyone's always very interested to know their take on that. And yes, they believe in a source consciousness that is responsible for the creation of everything. They don't use the concept of God as humans do, because they're not human, but they definitely have their own belief structure centered around a source consciousness that is the creator of all.
That's fantastic. Syann, I want to thank you and Paul for being part of the program. Good luck with your continued travels with the Zetas, and get one of them maybe one day and get them on the show. And as we talk about UFOs and extraterrestrial life, we always have to remember the late Brad Steiger.
Tell me about the story of Epsilon Butes. This is an incredible story that a lot of people might not be aware of what very well could be an alien object that is circling our moon.
I'm so intrigued by that, and you picked up on it when it first came out. I could not imagine why people weren't going wild about this. But here is a broadcast, so to speak, and sometimes we theorize that maybe there's I don't know what kind of device it'd be, but some type of tape recorder in the heavens that keeps broadcasting messages. But here, and serious-minded astronomers said, this is coming from a source. It's coming from something that, is circling. It is in an orbit, and it is broadcasting meaningful messages. Now, and then it just disappeared from the stories, and I tried to track it down and get more information, and then I don't like to project thoughts like this, and sometimes we get a little weary of saying, oh, it must be a cover-up. But I could not understand that this could really be anything other than some kind of cover-up with this information, and there must have been more that would be released and that we reported in the book. That alien contact, it seems as though someone was telling us, we're here and we're available, so to speak, for communication, and then there was nothing else.
And this object apparently was parked around our moon about, 13,000 years ago?
Yeah, this is what the communication claimed, that it had been parked there, like it was kind of an overseer, like that was its mission, to say when we were ready enough to receive this information.
Well, it would still be there in orbit, right?
Yes. That's what I understand, but I haven't been able to get any more information about it. There was a lot at first, and I tried to track it down at the time, and then it just dried up, and I couldn't get anyone else to answer. But, I'm stubborn. And, Sherry says, yes, I agree with her. We've got to put this in the book.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's a
if
great
enough
story.
People get excited about it. Some additional statements from someone who should know will be forced to make these statements and explain what happened.
Well, and if it's still broadcasting something, we should have SETI point its ears that way somewhere.
Yes, indeed. And I can't believe that it isn't pointed there. But I can't get any more information. Maybe someone with higher ranking than Sherry or myself can. And I'm hoping that people will see this, someone with that kind of influence, and demand that we say, what has happened to Epsilon Bootis?
You must have concluded that there are a lot of UFO reports out there, and they're good ones. Something's happening on this planet.
Oh,
you have to conclude that.
Okay, first of all, I know no disagreement from you. It's a great mystery.
It is.
Some people feel they have the answer, and they're very aloof about that, and they're very supercilious, saying we have the answer. As long as we have been in this research field, we realize that it's a multi-level phenomenon. It's a multi-level, multi-dimensional phenomena. We know something is going on. We don't know if it's extraterrestrial, if it's multidimensional. We don't know, though I kind of suspect there might be bases under the sea. There might be bases under Earth to account for some of the ancient legends. But the phenomena has been with us forever, and we feel that it influences every aspect of our existence in ways that we haven't even begun to dream of yet. We feel that strongly about it, that whatever the phenomena is, and we're not saying they come from Alpha Centauri, we're not saying they come from the hollow earth, we're simply saying consider all of this as a great mystery, a multi-layered mystery, but something is going on.
Brad, why do you think at such a young age, you, me, and so many other people became fascinated with stories of UFOs and extraterrestrial life? What happened to us?
Well, I think as the eminent philosopher Lady Gaga says, we were just born that way.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
I have to bring up one thing. I got excited about Epsilon Bootis, which is a favorite of mine. Some people like to play the name game with research, and I think we cannot overlook that the British astronomer who made the discovery of this robot satellite was named Duncan Lunan.
How about that?
So again, moon, it's beside the moon. So those little things kind of add spice to research.
We continue to get these UFO reports and stories all over the place. Yet there are some people who truly believe government's going to disclose. I don't think so, and I've told them that. What do you think?
I don't either. I don't either. I've said that, I think, as long as I've been researching, in writing, I should say, which goes back to the 50s and the first book in the 66 about UFOs. I've said then, it's not going to. And people say, well, they can't keep a secret. Oh, yeah, they can. I mean, but we have, and talking about this not long ago with Kevin Randall, whom I know you're aware of his fine research, and continually finding people making deathbed, I hate to use the word confession, testimony.
Sure.
Deathbed testimony.
They just want to get it off their chest.
Yeah. And I can't see why someone has kept it secret all of their lives and then on their deathbed would want to leave that as part of their legacy. So it seems we're building up to a time of disclosure, but I really am not optimistic about this coming anytime soon. I know our friends in the exopolitical side of it, they're very enthusiastic, and we hear from them regularly and respect all of their research and what they're trying to do. And, they're optimists, and I try to be a cockeyed optimist as much as possible. So I'm hopeful that we will have some sort of great revelation, but I'm just not terribly optimistic that it'll happen in our lifetime, anyway.
Yeah, unless it's a mistake.
A mistake.
A mistake or something like that happens.
Good one, George.
Let's go to the phones. David in Pleasant Hills, California, west of the Rockies. David, go ahead. You're on with Brad Steiger.
Hey, George. Hey, Brad. How you doing tonight?
Oh, okay, George.
Good.
What was your name?
David.
I'm David.
David. Okay, David.
Yeah, how's it going? I had a couple people that I've been kind of researching lately. I've seen a few YouTube videos. It's all over the internet with stuff like what John Lear has talked about. One of the big ones is Stephen Greer and that congressional. I think it was a congressional hearing that he was trying to get going as far as disclosure goes. Things like one thing I wanted to say though is I don't think we'll ever see disclosure because, as far as I know, the Bilderberg group is being controlled by the Greys. And as far as that's going on, as far as all that secrecy and these destructive agendas are going on, we're not going to see anything come out in the open.
Let's hypothesize about this, Brad. This group, the Illuminati, the Bilderbergs, these people, you think they're being controlled by ETs? I would say not. I think they just don't want us to know because they're afraid they will lose control of us.
Yes. No, I don't. One stays open, as I certainly have to do, and you certainly have to do, George.
Yeah.
Stay open to all. And, I'm open to that type of comment, but I think the Bilderbergers, Illuminati, and there's a lot to write about conspiracies. We're just being overwhelmed trying to keep up with that. But, again, the caller agrees that there's probably not going to be disclosure as far as groups being controlled by ETs or aliens or multidimensionals, whatever. That I think the whole field has and can have a certain paranoid aspect to it. And I think we have to be aware of that. I've seen so many friends since I began really kind of lose it, who were serious researchers, got in a little too deeply, felt that they really had insight into the truth. And then sad to say, many of them suffered mental issues and
that happens.
I won't go on, but it's a field, and I told Sherry before we really got into this strong again, it's like entering a magic feeder in one sense. And I said, things are going to happen, because when I was really into it in the 60s and the 70s, things that just beggared normal, sensible descriptions happen. And when we really got into it, those strange, unexplainable, mysterious things happen. And you get information from many sources, and then things are... You just have to watch a very cautious line. There's something about entering this field that you have to stay balanced. You really have to know yourself. And that's why we maintain that a time of meditation, a time of prayer, a time of reading from the Holy Scriptures of all faiths. I think you have to have that kind of balance. And it's a field we are convinced, and I'll say it again, it's the great mystery that affects all of us.
Oh, it sure is.
In so many ways.
What fascinates me, too, Brad, these stories of submersible UFOs.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
They pop out of the ocean. They're witnessed by sailors and people on boats, ships. Truly incredible stuff.
Marvelous stuff. And get those stories we receive all the time, from shrimp fishermen and other fishermen and military men, Navy men, and so forth who write us with their reports.
Can you imagine being on a boat and you see a UFO smash itself out of the water and just take off?
Well, we stood on a shore of a lake in Peru and saw that happen at least a dozen times in one night.
Yeah.
No explanation what we were really seeing, but we all knew what it looked like we were seeing.
Anything going back in or just going out?
No, they go out, too. They would come in
and out,
dive, then go out, and almost like they were putting on a
little show for us. Let's go to Clearwater, Florida. Scott, east of the Rockies. Hi, Scott. Go ahead.
Hey, good evening. They were putting a show on for you, Brad. They knew that you'd be watching, so they put on a little play.
Okay. All right.
You can't figure out what these things are, but I figured it out when I first heard about, the UFOs. Actually, they're supernatural. I don't know why you don't want to actually say they're supernatural. You say they're multidimensional, but you can't really, you kind of stay away from saying they're actually supernatural.
I don't think you've read many of my books, have you?
I haven't. I've never read any of your books, Brad.
Well, then you would know that I began speaking of the supernatural aspect back in the 60s, much to the dismay of my fellow researchers.
And, I still think a lot of people will say they're dimensional, they're demonic.
Mm-hmm.
I still think they're coming from planetary systems within our galaxy.
Well, you cannot deny that as a workable theory, but as we said, it's such a multi-layered theory. And certainly the spiritual or the supernatural, people always, that's kind of a knee-jerk word for a lot of people, but I think we understand what we mean when I say that. That aspect of another dimension, another world, another supernatural, whatever you define that, because there are so many similarities between UFO phenomena, aliens, and ghosts.
Fascinating discussion. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lone Hood, Sean Ladesseur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Burrows, Tim Banal, George Knapp, and Ian Punnett, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.